Good morning, good afternoon. Hello. Thanks everyone for joining Deborah and me today. Um, we'll jump right into this conversation. And I think the best place to start, since we've got Deborah with her tremendous expertise, is for her to just quickly introduce herself. So thank you for joining me for this conversation today. Deborah, tell everyone about yourself, what you do, who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me, Ed. This will be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So, I'm Deborah Boggs. I'm founder and CEO of DNS Executive Career Management, and we work with senior leaders, typically C level and board level leaders, which is our topic of conversation today, to prepare for and navigate the search for an executive role or a board seat. So, in our board work, we really work with people either getting ready to launch into their board career or level up from private company board seats to public company board seats. And we work, through positioning them for board seats, unique value, board documents, LinkedIn, and then the search process, how you go about that. So really excited to talk today.
Yeah, good. And quick introduction of myself. I've run businesses. Now I consult with B2B companies, really on revenue growth, mostly industrial manufacturers, some private equity owned, some US subsidiaries of foreign companies, and many are family owned. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today is stuff that I end up talking to people. I really work in two areas. One is sales team improvement for middle market, and the other
Mhm.
is the entire revenue growth process for those industrial manufacturers. We're both members of the Private Directors Association. I think you probably have the certificates in private company governance and private equity portfolio company governance as well. I've worked in tech as well as industrial, done a lot of global stuff, and we're both kind of located near the Boston area. Deborah's up in Maine, but we kind of bring that New England perspective
Yeah.
for better or worse. So let's jump into our conversation. Let me pull up our deck here. And I think the place to start is really, I mean, today the core of what we're talking about is going to be around independent directors, but we're
Yeah.
coming at it from what I would say is a really interesting angle. And I'd ask you to just kind of kick us off, providing a little bit of context. You talked a little bit about it, but a little bit more around specifically the private director area of your practice and the work that you do in that space. That'll give us a place to start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the work that we do with private directors is really around, when a senior leader is either off ramping their career and wanting to do something, stay involved in the market, stay active, but don't necessarily want to fully retire. We see that a lot. Or when they're looking to add value to their current career, right? They want to add perspective and depth to what they currently do. We work with those directors or aspiring directors, depending on where they're at in their search, to really, position for what's going on in the market because the search for a board seat is different than a job search, but it's
Right.
very time consuming and it's still going to take the same kind of focus, the same marketing assets. You're going to have to go through interview process, all of these things. And so we help with what that looks like. And we work with directors in every industry, but typically for our for our aspiring directors who are looking for their first board seat, it's going to be with a smaller company, private company, may even be an advisory board seat to start, and then into the corporate governance space. So it kind of runs the gamut across all industries. Um, and it really depends on where people are starting.
Yeah, I'm not sure how reassuring this conversation is going to be to people who are already super busy with everything they're doing, and now hearing you
Right.
talk about this is like another job search. They may be hesitant, but we'll dive into it. We'll give them the context, and then you'll be available as a resource if they want to talk through it further. Obviously, there are some organizations that can provide some good background and some support and some network. The Private Directors Association, National Association for Corporate Directors, which is not
Yeah.
necessarily as focused on private companies. Um, but as you and I were talking, I think what triggered our decision to do this event was a conversation we were having one time where we kind of wander back and forth between independent director roles and corporate governance and privately held and family owned manufacturing businesses. And you made the point that there are potentially significant, I'll call them selfish benefits to a business owner or a family, family business member to serving on
Hmm.
boards, and that really kind of triggered an interesting conversation, and that's, I think, the place that we're really going to start and dive in. Um, it's certainly an all-consuming job to run a
Yes.
family-owned middle market business. It's very fulfilling, but it it takes everything that you have between managing family, managing business, all the stakeholders. Often communities are very reliant on it. It's a big employer in a community. So I guess, the question is, as an executive in that business, as they're thinking about not only the time it's going to take to get that role, but the time it's going to take for them to properly serve in that role, can they justify it? And how much of a distraction is it going to be? What's the value they're going to get out of it? And as we talk through it, I mean, you kind of made the point, but can you afford not to?
Right.
Because if we're just marinating in our own business, that means we've got a very narrow perspective, the way we've done it internally for 40 years or 70 years or however long it's been. And so by finding that outside role and actively participating in the meetings and the meeting prep, you're going to be exposed to, other cycles and types of strategic planning and financial modeling
Hmm.
and accountability and revenue growth and talent management and the way different companies are looking at all those things, not just a textbook answer or reading a Harvard Business Review article, but the way a company is actually navigating it. And so your point is, if I understood you correctly, that's probably going to make you a more effective executive and leader and director in your company. So take us through your thinking on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so incredibly important. And earlier in my career, I was an executive in a family-owned business, not my family. So I had kind of the outsider's perspective of what a 40-year-old family business looked like and the challenges they can have if you don't go outside, right? And so, especially if it's a multi-generational business or it's a business that's been operating for many decades, you you often run the risk of not having the perspective of what's going on in the market, right? You're probably an expert at what you do, and potentially in your industry, but what's going on and best practices in other companies and things like that, because typically the people at the top in these roles have been there a very long time, and not everyone who has a seat on the bus maybe should be in that seat on the bus.
You
And
think?
so right, and you've got all of those extra political things going on inside your own family business, right? We know what
Because if you take
Thanksgiving.
somebody off that bus, imagine what Thanksgiving dinner is like.
Exactly, exactly. And so it doesn't mean that you'll always have the people around you that are going to be focused on the market, focused on seeing around corners, focused on what's going on in the larger industry, because their job is protected, right? And so I think sometimes we get so focused internally and we know what we've always done and it was really successful a couple of decades ago, but we're not
Right.
preparing for what's next. And that's going to be incredibly important. And it's not just for family businesses. We have a couple of large public companies that engage our firm as part of the professional development for their executives to sit on other company boards because
Really?
it's important to them. So a company like Novartis hires us to support their top executives to sit on other company boards because it's important to them to know what's going on in the market, see around challenges, get an outside perspective, especially if they've been with the company for a long time. So it's not just unique to family businesses, but I do think it's even more important for family owned businesses to get that outside perspective.
Right. It's I mean, family-owned businesses are so wonderful in so many ways and so challenging in other ways. And
Yep.
I see it often in that revenue growth side of things where, I mean, you said the way we've done it for 30 years and it's worked well. I would even challenge, it may have worked well from the lifestyle perspective,
Yeah.
but if what they're doing is growing consistently at 3 to 5% a year, that's essentially inflation. That's
Right.
not actually growing the business. And many people, I think, see that and assume we're doing okay because we're growing 3%. And again, maybe that pays the college tuition for the kids and the country club membership and lets them employ certain members of the family. But that's not a recipe to be for kind of a long-term, ongoing, vibrant sort of a business.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's so true. And I think that, the getting that outside perspective and just even understanding what's going on in other businesses, because we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And I don't know about you. I know you're very involved in other organizations. I am too. I am part of a business mastermind group, things like that, because I want people to be telling me what my team isn't going to tell me.
Right.
Um, and I know this is not a conversation about coaching, but I am a big advocate of having an outside external coach because my team isn't going to tell me what I suck at.
Sure.
And but I think there's always room for growth right there, and this is one of those things. So I think as we talk about the search process too, there's a lot of things in just that search process for a board seat that are going to be beneficial for you as a professional and as a business leader. Just in that process of getting out there, getting involved in other professional groups and organizations, getting your name out there, because I think sometimes
Right.
we're well known in our community, like you said, we're well known in our business, but outside of that, no one knows us, no one knows what we do.
Your point about Novartis though reminds me. One time I was on a fairly large nonprofit board, and one of the things that we did to try to recruit interesting directors that brought the skill sets we needed for the strategic skills matrix to plug some gaps was
Yeah,
to position this director role as a professional development opportunity for them. Yes, you'll be a director. Yes, we value your expertise. Yes, you're going to bring strategic perspectives that we believe are gaps on our board. But the value to you is that you're going to start to build that independent director muscle, which then you can take other places.
yes, absolutely. And it's so important. I think a lot of people are looking for that first board seat to say, and a nonprofit board seat is helpful to kind of at least get the lay of the land on what that looks like, especially if your family company doesn't have a board and you're
Right.
not used to what sitting in that seat looks like and what those conversations look like. I will say it's not typically for a lot of people. This is not true for everyone. Smaller nonprofit board seats are not great entry points into paid board seats and governance seats in private companies. And so I see a lot of people maybe want to add a bunch of private nonprofit boards or they're chair of this and they're chair of that, and they think, okay, well, this can move me into that, and it doesn't. And so I think the
Right.
experience is really important. I don't think I would focus on one or two passion areas, but
Right.
not, and especially women, I see try to fill their time with all of these nonprofit boards, and that's not going to turn into valuable business case.
Makes sense. All right. So point number one, it's worth doing the work. It's worth spreading yourself a little bit thin. It's worth getting good at prioritizing and keeping up with it because the perspective that you'll gain from that independent director role in another company will likely lead to substantial benefits for you in the business that you're involved in running every day.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the second point that you made to me that really kind of struck me as something I'd never thought of or heard before was that it can actually help with one of the major challenges of family business. So that's succession planning. And so
Mm,
what we often see is that the the company is somebody's life. In many
yep.
cases, they may even articulate the intent to die at their desk. They often back off that as they get older and realize they're not having as much fun anymore. But I mean, that's that many people bring to it. You made the point, if I understood correctly, that by seeking out independent director roles, you begin to essentially um, carve an identity for yourself as a business leader outside of the context of your own business, which might then facilitate that decision making process. It might induce you to be more open to discussion about when the right time is, who might step in on an interim basis from outside or the next generation. Did I understand that
Right.
point correctly? And if so, kind of build on that for us a little bit.
Absolutely. It's so important. And I get it. I mean, as a business owner, a lot of my identity is wrapped up in my work, right? And I'm sure for you as well. I've been doing this business specifically 8 years, and I'm not interested in stopping anytime soon. And I think I feel the way a lot of people feel, especially as an entrepreneur, business is in your blood, that the idea of retirement is scarier to me than the idea of working the rest of my life.
Right.
But that's probably good for my business. And it doesn't mean that I'm the right person to lead it into the next generation or whatever that may be. And so what I find is people will do one of two things. They'll either wait too long, get pushed out, and then want to start looking for something else, or they flounder, right? Where they
Right.
where they really struggle with retirement. Retirement's hard, and so the people that can proactively build a board portfolio first before you leave is really vital for a few reasons. Number one, it's easier to get a board seat if you're currently working. So, and it takes a while, right? So if you go into retirement kind of cold turkey, and then uh, and then start looking for a board seat, it can be hard. You're no longer involved in the business groups. You're no longer going
Right.
to the events. You're not, you don't have that job to lean back on as far as your title and introductions and all of these things, right? It's just harder. But if you think about it ahead of time as part of your career management plan, right? You're managing your career, not just your business. And what does that look like? And you can start early, get a board seat. After that, it's much easier. And then that way, when you start to off ramp, you're not you're not done, right? You're still offering your expertise to something. You're lending your decades of expertise to something that you care about. You are still involved and have an identity. So when you go to these parties, when you're at the country club, if you're at the, if you go to industry events, you still have something you can say. You don't just say I'm retired from blah. I'm
Right.
a board director for XYZ company.
But you made
It
if I
really,
can interrupt, you made what feels like a critical point. You're not just managing your business, you're managing your career. And if the career path
yes,
is dictated by family tradition, people may not think of it that way. So how do you
yeah.
kind of conduct some kind of how do you intercede with somebody to help them begin to think of it that way again when they're so busy?
Yeah. So, when you think about that first board seat, especially if you're still working, you can think about it two different ways. We often don't take time for ourselves, right? We're not going to take time for our own personal career. We're not going to do these things. But what we will do is things that will help the business. And so what I like to think about it is it's not just adding to your plate or one extra thing like a nonprofit board seat maybe, or, an HOA board opportunity. This is a critical action item for the health of your business.
So going back to point number one.
Going back to point number one, exactly. Carving out time is something you have to do for the health and sustainability of your business. It's not just about you. And I think coming at it from that, especially in that family business where it's hard to think about yourself as an individual because it's for the good of the family, it's for the good
Right.
of your employees, your community, all these things. This is not a selfish act. This is something that is critical for the business. And then oftentimes a clear succession plan is really critical for the business. And you can't
Of
do
course.
that if you're still sitting at your desk.
And
And
if
you
you don't
need
have
to
a
give
clear line of
people.
sight to how you're going to be fulfilled once you leave your desk.
Exactly. And knowing that someone can take over in that interim or take half time or help you kind of your way out. A good friend's husband is a pilot, and he's been a pilot a long time, concerned about retirement as well. And instead of retiring, he went on per diem, and they could just call him anytime. But he wasn't doing the full time, traveling 6 days
Right.
out of 14 days, all of this stuff.
Right.
And I know this is different, but that even just the option of per diem. Now, he never actually got called, but
Mm.
it gave him a year of like, oh, I'm still working. I could go back to work at any time. Gave him a really nice off ramp to know, like, oh, okay, this was fine. I can be retired now and no one died.
Right. Okay. So it's good for your business to get this perspective. It can facilitate somebody's recognition of the fact that they really need to begin to implement a succession plan because they've got an identity outside of their business. So those are a couple good reasons why this makes sense. On the other hand, you started us off by talking about it's a lot of work. To find a
Yes,
board seat is a lot of work and nobody has extra time. Now we all can make decisions, we can all prioritize and not do certain things that we do now, but that's a hard pill to swallow. So talk us through, as an executive who's listening to you, says, geez, Deborah makes a very compelling case, this all makes perfect sense. What do I actually do? I mean, how do I match the pitter patter to the chitter chatter and actually go about finding the seat? What do I need to do?
I love that, Ed. That's great. So, a couple of things. One piece is definitely an action item, to do item, and the next piece can be done in your regular day-to-day business in the industry as a leader in your industry, right? And so the first thing is we tell candidates you have to get clear on your ideal board seat, right? Because what you have to think about what kinds of companies you're uniquely equipped to serve, right? And that's really important to think about, because I think a lot of people when they start a board search will say, "Oh, I'll be a board candidate, and I can be a director on any kind of company. Like my work is transferable." The problem is boards don't bring on generalists. They need to they want to bring someone who has really specific expertise that can help them solve their biggest challenges or see around corners or mitigate risk, all of these things, right? So you need to think about what kinds of companies, and it may be a company adjacent to your industry. If you're going to have a conflict of interest, you can't necessarily go for your biggest competitor, right? But
Right.
that may be where you're most qualified to serve. They're not going to bring you on. So you need to think about adjacent industries or things that would make sense, vendor industries, things like that.
Hmm.
So really getting clear on that ideal focus. And that means, what industry, company size, maybe it's an earlier stage company that needs a seasoned adult at the table who's been there, done that. Maybe it's,
But
a company that is,
this feels to
yeah,
me though like something where, who was it? Rumsfeld, I think, talked about known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. None of us know what we don't know, and so if somebody's going through that analysis, it's hard to visualize those things that we don't even start to think about. Is that something that your firm does? Will it take somebody through that process of figuring out what the right kind of board seat is for them?
we do. I'm so glad you asked. And I fall into the category of I'm really great at marketing other people, not great at marketing my business. We could talk about that, Ed. My, but yes. So when a candidate comes to us, so say a candidate comes to us, and this is the majority of what we do. And so especially like with candidates looking to get a seat with a publicly listed company or things like that, or they're looking to launch their career, their board seat, their board career, they'll come to us and we start with what is that ideal board seat. And if they don't know, we will take them through an exercise to say, okay, what makes sense for you? Where is your best market value? And what is your unique value to that kind of a company, right?
Got
Where
it.
are you, what's going on with those kinds of companies? What challenges are they facing right now? And how are you uniquely equipped to solve for those challenges?
Okay.
And the other thing we help candidates with is reframing, because this is a big part of it. It's hard for people if you've been the doer, if you've been the executive leader. It's a family business, so you're very hands-on all of your career. You're not being brought in as a board member to be a doer, right? You're not being brought in to get your hands dirty. It's a nose in, fingers out strategic operating role, a strategic advisory role, right? You're
Yes,
not being brought in
governance
to
is
do
not
that.
operations.
Yep, it is not operations. We need to reframe our expertise and our board specific skills. And this is the
Right.
other thing we can do with our candidates is what are your board specific skills that make sense? Because no one's bringing you in to build a team. No one's bringing you in to enter a new market, drive revenue growth, manage P&L. That's not what's happening. And
Right.
so we think through that process. And then you're going to we typically tell our candidates, some boards will ask for a board resume, some will ask for a bio, and some ask for both. And so for our candidates, we develop the board resume and the board bio. So you have a package of documents depending on what someone wants.
Hmm.
And then we need to think about our LinkedIn profile. And family companies are terrible at this. You may not be using LinkedIn much now, but you're going to need to for your board seat search, right? Especially because it's going to be really heavily focused on network. And you need to be building your network. And that's a really great way to kind of keep in touch with people. So updating LinkedIn, you may have a profile you put up 15 years ago and haven't refreshed, right? We need to refresh that. We need to make it focused on your board search. And the good news is you can really go heavy into promoting your business on LinkedIn, and it's still positioning you as a strong board candidate. And we help our clients work through kind of what that looks like as well.
That's an interesting point. Just give me an example of that, because often I hear people framing that as a conflict, and you're describing it as something you can do simultaneously.
Absolutely. You know, there's a couple things. Sometimes we work with candidates that are looking for a board seat quietly because they're getting ready to retire and they don't want to scare their team or the market,
Right.
or they're getting ready, to make a jump. This is even true for people for a new career role, right? And they need to update their LinkedIn profile, but they don't want to look like a job seeker. Well, there's looking like you're doing really well at your current company and you're a strong advocate for your business is a good thing. That's not a
Hmm.
bad thing, and that
Right.
actually can help you show up in more searches and see, oh wow, Ed is he's got all the great experience we're looking for. He may be, he helped XYZ company grow. He may be able to help us get to the next stage as well. And so it's something you want to weave into your profile with your board specific skills. And the other thing is tell people you're open to board seats. This is where I think a lot of people think that you're going to get plucked out of obscurity, right? Someone's going to just find you and you're going to just magically be a board member. But until you tell people that you're open for a board seat and giving them very specific parameters around what that board seat looks like. Because again, it's not, I'm open to join a board. It's, hey, I want to help a company like this get to the next level or whatever it is. People understand what box to put you in, what doors to open for you if you're able to give them that information. So putting that out there on LinkedIn, making connections, having conversations, this is all an important part that also is good for your business.
Right. Makes sense. So how long does it take in terms of, the number of months for the process normally for you to work with somebody to go through that discovery and self-awareness and ideal company type and board role kind of process, figuring that out, and then preparing the documents? Is that something that takes 6 months to do, or how long?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. If someone wants to go through the process of finding what board makes sense and then building the documents, that honestly is about a 45-day process for us.
Okay.
We and our clients work with us as a boutique team. So we have, you'll work with a strategist and a coach, and then you'll work with a writer. And then once your documents are ready in LinkedIn, we physically upload and optimize LinkedIn, because for anyone thinking about LinkedIn, it's not just the content, but we also need to be thinking about our visual presentation on LinkedIn, our executive presence, right? So we're talking
Right.
headshot, background, image, featured section, things like that.
Right.
And then it's the optimization. Make sure you're showing up in the right kinds of searches for people like you, right? You're not job searching, but all of these things can open conversations. So that's an
So
important
45
piece to think
days.
about.
And if
Yeah,
somebody's got
45 days.
travel and other commitments, maybe it stretches out, call it 60 or 90. So that's that first piece. And then
Yeah.
how long does it take to actually find the seat once you have all those pieces in place?
And it's funny, I laugh because we can take as long as you need. So we have a board candidate who's an executive at Google, and he travels globally constantly. It took him a year to finish his
Wow.
documents. That's not normal,
Wow.
but if we're going through quickly, we can do it 45 days.
Okay.
And then the next step that we work with our candidates on, or that any candidate's going to need to do, whether they work with us or not, is thinking about their go-to-market strategy, right? What does that board search look like? And that's really going to be heavily focused on networking, and not just going to networking events and sharing business cards, but it's what rooms do you need to be in where the companies that you need to talk to are at, right? What are those rooms, virtually or live? Where do you need to be? And what does that networking conversation look like? And how are you building? We think about it like building and activating your network, right? You may have a deep network already, and that's great. That's easier, right? So then we need to activate it. We need to,
Right.
and by that I mean, reconnect with people, let them know what you're looking for, start conversations, and end every conversation with, who else should I know?
Right.
Because it's going to be those second and third degree connections, based on the data that I won't bore you with. But the data shows most doors open from those second and third degree connections. It's not the people that know us the best. So if you're
Right.
looking at your network now and you think, oh, there's nobody here who can help me, they're not the right people, all these things, that's okay. It's the next layer and the layer beyond that where the gold is.
So if we were going to set an expectation, a year.
Yeah, we typically tell our candidates it takes about a year of an active search to find that board seat. Now, it may not. You could have an active. It's based on it's preparation and strategy and luck, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
these things could happen, but I do tell people plan for a year. It's not going to be something that happens right away. Our most
Right.
successful candidates are ones to us 2 years out and say, "Hey, I'm getting ready to retire in 2 years. I want a board seat before that. I want to get ready right now."
Got it.
That's the most successful, for people, because it gives them time. Because the other thing is, can you get a board seat? Probably, but is it the right company that you want to hitch
Right.
your wagon to? And
Right.
that's the piece that takes time. And is it the right? It's going to take physical time to sit in the board meetings, right? Is it the group you want to sit with? Is it someone you want? Is it an industry or a product that gets you excited that you want to spend time on? Because the other piece to this is your board appointment can be lengthy. I mean, every company is a little different, but someone on our team actually accepted a board position and didn't know until they accepted it. It was a lifetime appointment.
Oh my goodness.
So ask questions too, but you're gonna, it could be 10 years plus. So you've earned the right at this point in your career, and especially in a family business when you haven't thought about your career this way. But at this point, when you think about board work, you've earned the right to be selective and to pick the thing that makes sense for you.
Yeah, your point about fit and culture is really important. I mean, I know I'm very strongly, if we look at it from the perspective of Carol Dweck and mindset, I'm very strongly growth mindset, and I get very impatient with
Yeah.
fixed mindset. And so
Yes.
I understand that the fixed mindset is absolutely important to certain roles in a company, and it all has to fit together, and you need all of that for a team. But if the board is almost exclusively fixed mindset, then I'm not going to be a fit there. If there's a
Yes. A
blend
hundred
that's
percent.
appropriate for all the different roles and responsibilities, then that's an important thing for me to figure out.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because the other thing you have to think about is it's hard to go from the boss to a collaborative strategic leader that's
Right.
influencing and not directing, right? That's hard. And so when you get in that situation, you're in a room full of experts and egos and all of this, it's a different thing to do.
Right.
And my team knows this. Nothing makes me crazier than people that put up roadblocks without solutions. And so if I'm sitting in a room with 12 people and all we do is put up roadblocks, I will want to gnaw my own arm off. And that's not going to be something I'm going to spend a decade doing.
Right. Exactly. So how many hours a week during this, call it 15, 18-month process? How many hours a week? Once somebody's documents are prepared, presumably that's perhaps a little bit more intensive, but on an ongoing basis, how much time are they committing to make this happen?
Yeah, I'd like to see about 5 hours a week. It's really more about consistency than it
Hmm.
is about the time you have to spend, right? Because I think a lot of people think, and I see this with executive job seekers a lot too. Okay, the time is spent on online applications or searching for board roles online or things like that. That's not where you're going to find this opportunity.
Right.
And so spending 5 hours a week, really an hour a day of reconnecting with your network, having virtual or live coffees, going to the strategic events that make sense for you, getting them on your calendar earlier so that people, in events and meetings and things don't fall over it, right? I think it's around consistency and constantly driving the ball forward. And it's hard because networking doesn't typically have a clear ROI, but it is
Sure.
where the gold is. And so constantly just making a point to have those conversations. And I also like to think about the easy things you can do on the couch. As a business leader, I call it like with a beer on the couch kind of things at night. Um, I know running a business is hard. It's, not a 9 to 5 job. And so I think about the things I can easily do on the couch with my kids while we watch TV, wind down for the night. And some of that is commenting on things on LinkedIn, sending connection requests, looking at what's going, reading industry news, seeing what's going on.
Right.
Those are easy things that don't take active time.
So wrap it up, I would say it sounds like what you're saying is it's not something you're going to do on a lark because it's going to take a commitment. On the other hand, it is something that's absolutely feasible to do while you're running your own business.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so vital. I mean, for your mental health and retirement, certainly. And also for the health of your business. It is.
Makes sense. All right, good stuff. Here are contact details for both of us, so you can track us down. Unfortunately, Deborah's email address isn't format very well there, but you can
It's
get the
so
point.
long.
You know how to reach her. So let's go through some questions. Let me look and see what we've got here. Um, so we've got from Julie. What's the realistic workload as an independent director, and how do you juggle that with your own executive role? So I think what she's asking, 5 hours a week to find the role, but then what's the commitment once you're in a role, and how do you juggle all that?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think that's one of the things you can ask during the interview process too, as you're wrapping up interview process and you're thinking about, getting an offer to join a board. It's one thing I would ask, but what you want to think about is how often the board meets. Companies are different. It may be monthly, could be typically quarterly. So you're going to think about that quarterly meeting. Maybe you have travel, maybe it's virtual. You'll have to think about whether you need days on either end of a board meeting. But then you're going to have committee work as well. And so, asking the question, how often does the committee meet? You're going to have ad hoc conversations as well.
Right.
We typically tell candidates to think about 10 hours a month as a commitment for a board member, but that's a question you certainly want to ask.
Yeah, so 120. I think the rule of thumb that I've heard is like 200 hours a year, 250 hours a year. Maybe that's including some of the travel back and forth or some of those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah, and it certainly depends. And if you're going to look at an advisory seat, and this is a different conversation, not necessarily the governance seat, but if you're launching your board career and you're looking at an advisory role that's not as formal,
Hmm.
you definitely want to set some parameters around your time commitment, because sometimes founders of startups can blur the lines between board advisor
Right.
and fractional leader, and that can
Right.
get time consuming fast.
But it goes back to the nose in, fingers out sort of thing. You got to be very
Exactly.
clear on that distinction.
Yeah.
As long as we're talking about time, how about money? I mean, nobody takes a private director board seat to become wealthy. What's
Right.
what's your guidance in terms of money?
You know, it's so hard because there's not a lot of data for private companies on what private companies offer. So, you'll have to think about what makes sense for you and what a yes and no number is around either it's typically either cash, equity, or a little bit of a mix of both. Um, if you're looking at those early stage advisory roles, that's typically all equity or sometimes just as a resume builder, so that's something you're going to want to think about. But typically, when we're talking to candidates, no one's expecting to make real decent money at it, but they may have the longer term range of hoping to get on a public board, which definitely is more lucrative. So, um, yeah, you're not going to make a ton of money. There's not a great data on it. And if you know of some, Ed, I'd love to talk about it too.
There is some interesting data. I think I saw it at the Private Company Governance Summit that's run by MLR Media that does Private Director Magazine. When they have
Yeah.
that event every year in DC, they have some board compensation consultants come in and have some data. I think for kind of lower middle market, we're probably talking somewhere $30,000 to $70,000 a year plus
Hmm.
reimbursed travel expense, maybe a small bit of equity. So it's really for the professional satisfaction and the intellectual engagement, and it maybe covers some of your expense of putting the time into it.
Yeah,
It's obviously not
absolutely.
like a public company board role.
No, yeah, and what we see typically, and just ad hoc, not anecdotally, it's usually around that 30,000 range for an early to mid market company.
Okay. All right. So here's another one. Stephen is asking, are there any particular attributes that make a good board candidate? Is there any rule of thumb?
Yeah, there is. People ask me all the time, "Am I board? Am I a good board candidate? Would there be an opportunity for me?" And the answer is, there's some things that do help for a board candidate, right? One of them is a C-level title. It's really hard to get a board seat without having that C-level title, um, in whatever function that is. Now, if the function is, say, CHRO or the general counsel or chief legal officer, you're also going to need to come with something else because it's hard. There's typically only one seat at the board for a lawyer or an HR leader, and so you need to think
Right.
about your business acumen as well and how else you can serve. Um, but you're also going to need, at least 15 years of experience, typically 20, 25 plus, right? So this is where age is helpful. And it's the only time in our resume writing that we don't have to get creative with hiding an age, right?
Right.
Your deep experience is going to be required. You're the adult at the table. And so don't worry about that. And then something that's a little bit different in the market, right? So when I say this, if you've run a business and it's been going, 3% a year, there's not a ton going on. It's hard, not a lot of change, things like that. It's a little bit harder. But anybody who has M&A, IPO, divestiture, any kind of experience doing anything kind of an event, a sale, um,
Transactions.
transactions, yeah, launching into new markets, global or international experience. Some of those things are really attractive in the market and um, can help make you stand out in the market for a board seat. And then also anything really, any niche industry expertise, things like that can really help
Hmm.
as well. But thinking about, table stakes are C-level roles for most people. Now, if you're at a really large company, which is not who we're talking to right now, but if you're a VP at a really large company, then you can typically come in at a smaller company as a board director. But usually you want to think about a C-level title in your function.
Um, just that prompts a question for me. Does your firm work with small businesses to help them build the board skills matrix to help them understand what particular skills they should be looking for?
We can, yes. And it's funny because with our candidates, we work with the board skills matrix to see where their skills are. So we'll use a board skills matrix for their industry, usually getting,
Hmm.
digging into industry matrices, and using that from the unique value perspective side.
Right.
But we can work with boards or we can introduce them to people that can help if they're looking at board governance structure or they're looking to launch their first board. What we don't do is placements because I don't want to get into being the having a stake in the game about where our
Right.
clients land. We want to make sure they're in the right place. So we don't do placements, but we will do advisory.
Got it. All right. One more question here from Kathy. So you made the point, obviously, you're not going to work for a competitor, and she echoes that. But then she's saying, do I have to go look in a completely different industry, or can it be adjacent? Do you have any rule of thumb for that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Adjacent is typically best because you're most uniquely qualified for it, and it's not going to be a conflict of interest. But it's one thing that you are, if you have a board or you're not CEO at your current company, you're going to want to get approval first, because every company can make this decision. And sometimes, and we've seen this happen, where someone will go through the process, do their board documents, get ready for their search, maybe even get an offer for a
Right.
board seat, and then for whatever reason the company has a policy against it, right? So
Oh, that's got to be
know
awkward.
that ahead of time. It's very awkward. It's awkward for everybody. It's uncomfortable. It's never a good look when you have to step down, or.
Right. Right.
So I always say get approval first so there's no surprises, and then you'll know what kinds of companies would make sense, right? So I always think about adjacent industries, vendors into your industry, maybe even people that are building, businesses outside of your market. So maybe you
Hmm.
are very localized,
Different
companies
geographic
just
area.
like yours, but yeah, but different geographic areas, things like that are good places to start versus
Got it.
going into something completely random because it's harder to make that case.
Makes sense. All right. Fabulous conversation, Deborah. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your insights. Everyone, take a quick look her, grab her contact details so you can be in touch. And with that, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up, Deborah?
The last thing I would add, I really appreciate this conversation. This was really great. For anyone who wants more information on these things, follow me on LinkedIn as well. I provide a ton of content around board search best practices. So happy to help. But really, it comes back to getting really clear on that ideal focus makes the search so much easier.
Makes sense. Thanks very much for joining me today, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Ed. It was really great to meet you, and I appreciate this conversation.
Great.